Hello everyone. Now welcome to Edinburgh's Ghosts, Murderers and Monsters. Now I'm going to be your guide today. My name is David and I'm originally from Australia. Now I've been a tour guide here in Edinburgh since 2013, so for quite a while. Now I came here to Edinburgh after I finished my degrees in performing arts acting. I had a choice. Do I be an actor or do I be a detective? And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do something a little bit different first. Now, I decided to do a European trip. I loved it, loved Europe, but I ran out of money. So I came here to Edinburgh, and I got myself a job as a tour guide. And I loved being a tour guide. As I said, I did performing arts acting, so I love to perform in front of people. I was first just a general history tour guide, then I became a horror tour guide, then I became a castle tour guide, and finally a Harry Potter tour guide. Also an Arthur's Seat tour guide as well. I loved it all, but in the back of my mind, I always thought I was going to go back to Australia. Then I met a woman. I fell in love, I got married. This is a horror tour, I got stuck here. But I still love Edinburgh, I still love my job, and I still love my wife. They're the main things. But my job kind of changed. You see, suddenly the world changed last year. I could no longer take people around in big groups. I was also locked into where I was staying. I couldn't move too far. So I started creating virtual tours. Now I have a virtual Harry Potter tour. I do that from home. I also have a virtual horror tour. That's a very recent one. It's a combination of a historic horror tour and a video game. And I was having a lot of fun with all that sort of stuff. But now things are opening up again. I can walk around the streets. Things, the world is starting to slowly turn back. And so this is my time to actually walk out with a gimbal, walk around the streets and actually show off the beautiful city of Edinburgh, but still in this virtual format. That way, from the company of your own homes, and also watch me walk around some of the dark and haunted streets and have a laugh at me when I get scared. I consider myself a brave person, but walking into places by yourself at night sometimes can get you quite scared. So if you do hear me getting worried, don't worry, I am actually going to be fine. I'll be fine the entire way through, no matter how much I start asking for my mother and all that sort of stuff. Now, another thing is, it has been a very tough time, considering, my main job is tourism. So what you'll find that my PayPal is in the chat. You can also find links to my other experiences that I do, and you can also find a link to my website. So if you do like this tour, I do say pay what you feel at the end. But what I'd also really appreciate is if you guys just talk to me. I really need people to talk to me as this tour goes on. I might be telling stories, so to get to your comment during this tour. I am going to go back through and have a look at all the comments, and hopefully I'll get to respond to you afterwards if I don't respond to you here. But to start things off, let me just flip things around a little bit. Now we are on the beautiful streets of Edinburgh. Now this used to be a walled-in city. Now I'm sorry I have to show off a bit of construction. There's some construction going on. But when it was walled in, going back to 1517, they decided to tax people every time they tried to leave. Now the commoners could not afford these taxes, and that caused generation after generation of people to think that everything outside the city walls was the world's end. There's nothing out there but death and a place called England. That's about all they know. Now, the city started going upwards and inwards because there wasn't much room. Now, the way to get into your apartment was to go down these narrow closes. Now, close is short for enclosure, everything close together. And even during the day, and think about this, at the moment you can see it all nicely lit up, but it's all covered over the top. So even during the day, these closes got very, very dark. Now on the north side of the city, we did not have a wall. We had the Norlock, a massive swamp. People used to throw toilets out the window. It all had to go somewhere, so it came down the closes and filled up the valley. Now that massive cesspit, if a big gust of wind came across it, it would blow all that methane gas onto the Royal Mile in high amounts of... And suddenly they're hearing ghosts coming out of these closes. Now I just want to tell you about a ghost which apparently haunts this close. I don't want to go too far in just in case my sight goes out, but I'm going to get a little bit further in. So you can see it's still twilight, and then suddenly it looks like it's dark in here. No sunlight can get in. Now this close is haunted by the ghost of Johnny One-Arm. Now Johnny One-Arm, his name was John Cheesley. He was a nobleman in 1680 who wanted to have a legal separation from his wife and children. So he took them to court, and the judge of the case, Judge Lockhart, granted him the legal separation, but then said, "You owe your former wife £84 a month." To which Cheesley yells at Lockhart, "I will give you justice." A week later, Lockhart was walking down this close on his way home when Cheesley came out from behind him and shot him in the back of the head. And he yelled out, He did not care he was going to be hanged for murder. But you can't just kill a judge and be happy about it. So on the day of his execution, they decide they're going to torture him in front of a large crowd. They put him in a device called wooden boots, which crushes your toes. And as they're crushing his toes, he just starts laughing. They start crushing his fingers, he continues to laugh. They chop off the arm that he used to kill the judge. They put the gun around his neck in a chain, and when they hang him, they wave the severed arm in front of his face. The last thing he lets out is a little chuckle. The crowd is mortified. How did he laugh through all that torture? His body was meant to remain hanging at the Mercat Cross for 7 days, but on the third day, his body up and vanishes. Where did it go? People are thinking about this when they're walking down these narrow closes. Suddenly they hear laughter from behind them. To them, that's John Cheesley. He's stalking them. Calling him Johnny One-Arm. They're renovating a place in Dalry. That's just outside the city. And they were pulling up the floorboards, and they came across a skeleton. Now the skeleton lived there. So the case is solved. On the third day, his brother took him down and gave him a burial. But this story of Johnny One-Arm stalking the streets of Edinburgh is still a big part of Edinburgh folklore. But now we're going to head a little further up. Now they wouldn't have hanged him here. This is where the Mercat Cross used to be, but they used to string up the bodies on the Mercat Cross. Now this is where the Mercat Cross used to be. The new one is just over here, which we're about to visit. Now this reason why this was burnt down was during the Jacobite uprisings. The last one of 1745, Bonnie Prince Charlie came to the top and announced himself the true King of Britain. And the locals cheered him because the king had not been up here for almost 100 years. So, that when the Jacobite rebellion was over, they burnt the whole thing down. 4 hours after the boy, and it was actually more. They got more creative later on. King, they'd nail you through the tongue. And you can also see at the very top, I'm going to see if I can hit it with my torch, there's a unicorn. Now the unicorn is the national animal . There's less people. As the time goes on, the lag will be a little bit better. But let's head around. There we go. The quickest reset ever. Okay, everything should be all together. Are we live? Are we going? It just said lost connection there for a moment. Are we live and going? Okay. Let's give it a second. Are people here? Okay. Let me I'm going to wait here with the beautiful castle and all the settings behind me. I'm going to wait until I get the... Okay, we're on? Oh, I'm so sorry. I have no idea. Okay. I am so sorry, everyone. I have no idea what happened. I think a ghost got into the Wi-Fi there. Ghost got into the signal. Suddenly, as soon as I started walking out of that close, talking about one-armed Johnny, everything just kind of went nuts. And funny enough, as soon as I got away, things started going back again. So, okay, I'm back on YouTube. People, please tell me you're here. And if you are here, it's great that you stayed with me through technical issues. And thank you for if you're still hanging around, thank you so much for being here, because I do want to tell you some great stories and I do want to give you some great horrors. Castle at the moment. Now before we get... I just want to tell you a quick story. With this really nice backdrop here, Edinburgh is a pretty city. But I want to tell you about a woman with a very tough job. Now this lady was called Miss McKinnon. Now she owned many of the establishments around here in Edinburgh. Now I like to always talk about her right near the castle because quite often it was the royal family members who had a lot of funds with the establishments. And by establishment I mean, well, brothel. Those brothels. Now Miss McKinnon, she owned 3 brothels around Edinburgh. One night, a couple of noblemen came inside, they had their fun, and then they decided, you know what? Oh, hello Maria, good to have people back. Good to see you again, Alexa. Now, she had 3 noblemen come into her establishment. They had their fun, and then afterwards they thought, you know what, we're noblemen, we don't need to pay. They had fun with us, not the other way around. Now she said, lads, pay. But they didn't. They laughed at her and they tried to walk past her. Now she pulled a knife from her sock and demanded payment. And they laughed at her. 3 of them, 1 of her. What's she gonna do? All 3 of them. Now she murdered them by taking away their manhoods. It was a pretty grisly murder. Now the 3 men were found mutilated on the streets because of the way the men were murdered. With the establishments, a lot of the women were questioned, and Miss McKinnon knew she was going to they were going to get into trouble if she didn't come forward, because the police were going to arrest someone for killing these noblemen. So she came forward and said, I confess, I did it. And I did it alone. Now, more than likely, she didn't do it alone. She probably had other women helping her. But she was arrested for mutilating those 3 men. Now, they took her to the Grassmarket, somewhere where a young man came through the crowd with half an orange and chucked it to her. She caught the orange. He had the other half, and when they dropped her, they both bit into the orange at the same time. That was to symbolize their final kiss. because that mysterious man was her lover. And that was their final kiss, both kissing into the orange. But now, we've got you here. Thank you so much. Guys, thank you so much for staying with me. I know there was technical issues. I also want to say there is a full moon tonight, which might be disturbing things. It looks like a big light in the sky. I also want to point out, yeah, ghost interference, something's interfering, the George Harriet School. Now we hopefully will get a little bit closer to it later on, but you do get a nice view from the esplanade. Now the George Harriet School, J.K. Rowling in her mind picked it up and put it on Edinburgh Castle. And that's what it looked like. Just so you know, she wrote the first 2 books here and the last book here as well. And parts of the books in the middle, but she was a billionaire. But on to the horrible stuff. Well, talking about horrible, the last season of Game of Thrones. Now the reason why I'm bringing up Game of Thrones is you can see the round building, it's going to look completely useless with my finger, but just there, that round building, tower, which was 3 times taller. Now that was built in 1390 and it came down to the Lang Siege of 1573. But according to George R.R. Martin, it had sky cells, prison cells that are open to the cliff face. So you can either open your cell, so you can either wait out your sentence or walk out your cell and commit suicide, just like Tyrion in that cell. Now that's what George R.R. Martin said. I actually did some research, found 0 evidence that that ever happened, but George said it. I am a Game of Thrones fan, so I'm going to run with it. But now we get to Edinburgh Castle. Let's get... So I want to tell you about a dinner which took place here. And I'm extremely happy to see you as well. I'm extremely happy to have you all back. Let's just flip things around. Now I want to tell you about the Black Dinner. Now, maybe I need to get a bit closer so you can actually see my face. You can look, by the way, at night you can walk all the way up to Edinburgh Castle, all the way up to the entrance. Now I want to tell you about the Black Dinner. Now this took place in 1440, but it really started earlier than that, in 1437, when King James I was assassinated while sitting on the toilet. Now after his assassination, his 9-year-old son has to come to power. He's not old enough to rule. He needs a regent, someone to rule in his place. He needs to be at least 16 years old. So the governor of Edinburgh Castle thinks, you know what, I'm going to be the regent. Now him and his men go to Perth, kidnap the 9-year-old king, and get him down to Edinburgh as the new capital of Scotland. And we've been the capital ever since. That's how we became the capital, we kidnapped a king. Crichton has lined it up. He's going to be the regent when he hears some bad news. The king's mother has remarried, and she's married a member of the Douglas clan. And William Douglas, the leader, he is about to turn 16 years old. He is a really, really good friend of the king's, and the king has promised him as soon as your birthday hits, you're going to be the regent. Well, Crichton couldn't have this. So he invites over William and his younger brother David over here for a feast. And during the feast, Crichton comes out with a severed bull's head, and he puts that on the table in front of William Douglas, a severed bull's head being a token of death. The Douglas lads know exactly what this means, so they stand up and they draw their swords, but that was their mistake. By drawing their swords at the dinner table, they committed an act of treason. You see, that was breaking hospitality. Crichton baited them. They should have never drawn their swords at the dinner table, and Crichton had the right to drag them outside and saw off both of their heads. Now they call this the Black Dinner, and for you Game of Thrones fans, this was the inspiration for the Red Wedding. But now we're going to go a bit further away. I'm going to walk a little bit backwards to show off a bit more of the castle, because I also want to tell you about the Witch of Edinburgh Castle. and talk a little bit about the Scottish witch trials. Now the witch trials, there's quite a few cars coming up. I'm going to try the best I can to cover the mic. But the Scottish witch trials, they started up there's three major ones. There was the one in 1590, and then, there was one in 1520, then in 1590, then in 1560, then in 1590. I'm getting a bit distracted. There's cars actually all driving towards me at the moment. So I'm kind of walking backwards towards cars. But anyway, the reason why the witch trials started is because the kings needed excuses. A lot of people keep mentioning getting killed on the toilet. A lot of kings were killed on the toilet back then. It's one of the few places you don't have your men standing around you. Now, the main reason why the kings are starting witch trials is because they need an excuse to go to war. You see, the best way to prove yourself as a king back then is to start a war with someone and win. So you have to pick a fight with someone you know you're going to beat. So why not pick on women? Why not pick on Satan himself? And say, I'm going to take on Satan, I'm going to take on the devil by burning his brides. Now, this is my personal take. If you see, whenever the witch trials started, it was always a king needing to prove themselves. Now, there was a lady called Janet Douglas, another Douglas, who married the Earl of Glamis in 1528. This is during the reign of James V, and James V doesn't like two things, and that is women and Douglases, and she was both. Now, when her first husband died, he accused her of poisoning him. There wasn't enough evidence, so instead he accused her of being a witch, brought her here to the dungeons of Edinburgh Castle, and didn't torture her, but instead tortured her son in the cell next door. That was until she confessed. Now, she was burnt out here. I'm walking backwards. It would have been in front of the castle where they burnt her. And James yelled out, "Finally, I have justice." Now, it wasn't until after her death she became the witch of Edinburgh Castle. You see, James then claimed she was being haunted. He was being haunted by her. And royal family members have said to have encountered this witch of Edinburgh Castle, Janet Douglas. So in death, well, basically she took her role. But now we're going to walk forward. So Shannon, it's once you've shared bread and salt, you can't attack at the dinner. I'm not 100% sure on that. That is a Game of Thrones. Though I believe so. I heard you've got to start wining and dining them. So I'm guessing it is, just as soon as you start feeding them, they are your guest. Talking about witches, going back to the witch trials, Edinburgh did kind of say sorry for all those women who died during the Scottish witch trials. Right here, you can see the witch's well. Now, this is meant to be an apology for all those women who died during the Scottish witch trials. Now, they put up a small drinking well, which actually doesn't work. They also put a plaque on the wall, and if you read the plaque, there's no apology. I'm going to try to dual torch it here. Well, that's not really working that well, but you can actually see it says, "Some use their knowledge for evil purposes, while others were good." So what they're saying is, we were killing a lot of women back then. Some were good, some were bad. Please just don't blame us. It's a political apology. Now, they put this plaque up in 1978, so quite recently. But now I'm going to start heading down a little bit off the cliff. I want to tell you another quick story. I want to tell you the story about Jesse King, the baby farmer. Very, very disturbing name. Runs their own orphanage. Now, she married a man called Mr. Pearson. It's actually the 19th century now. She's very chatty, very popular, doing this very Christian thing, looking after the forgotten children. Now, one day the police pick up a young boy called Alexander. And Alexander claimed he had lost his parents. So they take him over to the baby farmer's house. Jesse takes him in. A few days later, the parents show up. It turned out Alexander lived down in Leith. He ran away from home. So they go back to the baby farmer's house, they knock on her door, Jessie answers, and they go, hey, and 1 second, just let the cars go by. They go, we need Alexander back. Turns out he just ran away from home. Now immediately, Jessie froze and started to shake. The police pushed their way inside. Now, they think they're going to find children everywhere, but instead they found 2 little girls scrubbing the floor like slaves. They went down to the basement and they found jar after jar of children's body parts. You see, this is what Jessie was doing. Every time she took in a new kid, she would take that child over to the city council, get that kid's name added to a list, and the more names on the list, the more money she got from the city council. Then she'd take him to the local churches. I'm just going to run across the road here, it's going to be a bit loud. Then she'd take him to the local churches and get money from the collection plates. And when she had all the money she could, she'd take them home, murder them, and chop up the children. That way, there's no body to be traced back to her. Now, she was arrested. She was immediately taken to the police station and hanged. Then they buried her in an unmarked grave in the cemetery we're going to walk through in just a bit. Now, they did interview her husband about this, Mr. Pearson, and he goes, I always thought there was something funny about my wife, though she was never charged. So he was never charged, even though more than likely, well, he was in on it. But now we're going to the beautiful Victoria Street. And yes, definitely haunted gimbal and phone. Yes, my gimbal is a little bit. But now, I want to show off this street. Hello. Oh yeah, I'm at work. Now, every shop on this street is actually painted a different colour. It's meant to represent what this shop sells. Now, at night, people have claimed to hear a ghostly cart coming down this street. Now, that's said to be the cart of Thomas Weary. Thomas Weary was a major in 1650. He retired from service and he came to live here on Victoria Street / West Bow. You can see it actually changed his names just over there. And he came to live here with his elderly sister. Now he used to go to church every day. He was a pillar of the community, but he never let anyone inside his apartment. Now he used to live right here. Oh, it's a bit dark at the moment. Let me just give it a second for it to light up. He used to live right here where the Caddies and Witchery Tours is today. Now, he's at the back of the church. He got up and said, I confess, I'm in league with Satan and I'm having an affair with my sister. Now, they just thought he was going a bit crazy in his old age, so they took him back to his house. And they noticed that all the crosses were upside down. So they interviewed him, and they interviewed both him and his sister, and they both said, "Yep, we're having an affair, and we are in league with the devil." So they were taken down to the Grassmarkets, told that they should repent, but instead they refuse. And what they do is they strip naked to shock the crowd. Now they were burnt alive down in the Grassmarkets. Now it's said that a ghostly cart came along, picked him up, and then they rode away together. And since then, people have reported that cart coming down the street. So here's a little image a friend of mine made of Thomas Weary coming down the street in his cart. Just thought I'd show that off. Just imagine that in the middle of the night, having to encounter a ghostly cart of a man. They also say, it came in later, they said he had a cane that could turn into a snake. But now, let's head towards the Grassmarkets. Oh, before we do, I also want to point out that this beautiful street here, just to get a look back, it was actually the inspiration, well, it was part of the inspiration for Diagon Alley on, in Harry Potter. Also, you can see a shop called a Ha 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 Ha, a joke shop. But now, the Grassmarkets itself, which we're going to quickly go through, we're actually a little late on time. What happened earlier with the error, so I'm going to jump over to the graveyard, but I do want to point out the Grassmarkets. It gets its name from the farmers who were here in the 15th century, who used to line up big stacks of hay and sell them off to the other farmers who would herd cows, and the cows would come down the cowgate. So that was the second execution spot. They moved it from the heart of Midlothian, and you can also see just over here, I'm going to run to it real quick. Right here you can see the last drop. That's where they took convicted criminals for their last drink, before they had their last drop. But now, let's continue on, and what we're going to do is we're going to head into a graveyard. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not too confident going through this graveyard, especially at night. You stayed in the Grassmarket. I just felt sorry for people who had rooms in the Grassmarkets, especially in August time. It's probably the loudest place in the city. Now, I also want to tell you a real quick story. I heard this from a friar. Apparently, there was a monk walking through a cemetery here in Edinburgh, and he found a man lying on the ground sleeping. Now, he just thought he was a homeless man, so he woke him up and asked, do you want me to get you something from inside? And he goes, no, I just want to lay here, because at night, when I'm at home and I'm laying in bed, I'm always afraid there's a skeleton underneath me. And then, so I tried sleeping underneath the bed, and there was then I feared there was a skeleton on top of me. So I'd rather just sleep here in the graveyard. That way I know, at least I know there's a skeleton underneath me. And so the monk said to him, what about you just take off the legs of your bed? And so the man took off the legs of his bed, and he slept calmly ever since. That's just a nice little story I heard. Also, going back to the witch trials, I just want to point out a very ashy wall. Now, the ashiness on the wall, that's all victims of the witch trials. See, it turns out when they were burning women at the stake, human ash made really good mortar for walls. So, all this, these are all victims of the witch trials. This ashy wall. But now, we're going to head into a graveyard, Greyfriars Kirk. Luckily, this section is actually a little bit lit up. Yep. Now it's kind of weird, whenever I get into this graveyard it always looks like the sky gets a little bit redder. I can't really explain why. Now at least this section here, I always feel a little bit more confident because it's lit up. But obviously that's not what you're here for. You want to hear some of the darker stuff. Well, as pretty as this looks, we're actually walking upon layer after layer of dead bodies. You see, they used to bury the bodies 6 foot deep into the ground here until it got full. Then they buried them 4 foot deep. Then they buried them 2 foot deep. Then they just sort of stuffed them in the best they could. Nowadays we call it the Edinburgh lasagna. Soil, meat, soil, meat, soil, meat, soil. Now another reason why this graveyard is meant to be so haunted is because this graveyard had the first ever concentration camp. Now I've got to tell you a quick story about the Covenanters. Now the Covenanters, I don't know why they chose lasagna. The Covenanters, they were a Presbyterian sect of the Scottish Church who were against the Anglicans. Why is it so cold in here? So one second, I've got to fix my torch. Come on, work. Okay. Now, these Presbyterians, they were against the king's divine right. The king believed he was the head of the church. Now, it really started with Henry VIII down south, but it made its way up here. And Charles I decided to change the prayer books here in Scotland, which really upset quite a lot of people. And so they signed the National Covenant. That's saying that they're happy to actually go by the laws of the king. They're happy to be in his service, but the king is not the head of the church. Well, the kings found this heretical. And they had to, this movement, these Covenanters, they had to go underground. Now, it all came to the boil in the Battle of Bothwell Bridge of 1679, when 6,000 Covenanters decided to fight 5,000 of the king's forces. The king's forces were much better trained, much better disciplined, and so, unfortunately, they lost. And they were slaughtered, and the 1,200 were rounded up and brought here to Greyfriars Kirk and brought to the Covenanters' prison. Now, I'll explain more when we get to the Covenanters' prison, and yes, this is the graveyard where J.K. Rowling got a lot of her names for her characters. Someone just mentioned that. Ooh. Something is jumping along. Okay. Now, I want to show you how dark this graveyard is. One second. Because I'm not sure how well you can see it, but this is all from the Victorian era. They used to decorate their graves with screaming face of Satan and baby with skull on knee. This is all part of the macabre. What happened was, during the Second Industrial Revolution, when we suddenly felt like we had much better power. Oh, hold on. I'm sorry to whip the camera around, it's just, I was hearing, okay, I'm sorry about that. During the Second Industrial Revolution, because we had so much more power over the world around us, we suddenly thought we had power in the afterlife. And things like this will grant you higher status when you go to the other world, when you die. At least that's what they believed. I mean, you have power, and we have more power over the world, why not more power over spiritual matters? So that's why they decorate their graves. You can even see, one second, that is the King of Death right there, with his crown on. And all the skulls, and two women who are in love with death. It was after World War I when this all went away, when suddenly they saw technology can just destroy everything around you, that this kind of era of the macabre went away. It's suddenly extremely dark now. Oh, sorry, one sec. I've got two torches actually, and none of them are very effective at the moment for some reason. Oh, just so you know, this is a herb garden. Now this herb garden, apparently herbs grown in a graveyard taste really, really nice. I'm wondering what's flavouring those herbs. Are people still with me? I don't really want to be in here alone. Are people still with me? I want to know if people are still with me. Please let me know. Okay, good. People on the other... Okay, that's good, that's good. But now we're heading to one of the most haunted sections, the Covenanters' prison, where they stored the Covenanters I mentioned earlier. And it's not meant to be this dark in here. And I'm even surprised there's no one walking about. I was thinking maybe there'd be some random people just sometimes cruising through. Looks like I'm doing this alone. Now, oh, by the way, for the rich people, they get mausoleums. That's to keep out body snatchers. Many used to break into cemeteries at night, dig up the recently deceased to sell to the medical school. The medical school, they needed more dead bodies for practice, but no good Christian was going to, give up their body to science. So had to rely on men known as Bodysnatchers, who would break into cemeteries at night, dig up the recently deceased, and sell them for about £7, which was about 5 months' wage back then. I'll get into more into the Covenanters in a little bit, but right here is where they kept the Covenanters prison. Now, they were looked over by George Mackenzie, the Lord Advocate. Now, he demanded complete silence from them. They would lay face first in the mud for at least 3 or 4 hours every day, and they would. Don't scare me like that, Kristen. Now, they would say, I'm sorry for whipping the camera like that. I'm so sorry. Sorry. When they would lay face first in the mud, if they moved or made a sound, they wouldn't kill the person, they'd kill the people either side of them. So you're responsible for your neighbour's life. Out of the 1,200 Covenanters brought here, only 400 of them survived. So world's first ever concentration camp. Out of respect, they chain this up. And George Mackenzie, he still looks over this graveyard. You see, just over here is the Black Mausoleum. Let me just find it. The Black Mausoleum. George Mackenzie was buried here, and as a rite of passage, school children will sometimes come up and try to look inside, because apparently the whole graveyard, I'm going to go around really slowly, this whole graveyard is haunted by the Mackenzie poltergeist. Apparently George does love to attack people, and let's see if we can look inside. Why can't I see anything? Okay, we can just make out something. Okay. I'm not sure if you can see much. George, if you're here, I mean no disrespect. There's no such thing as ghosts. No such thing as ghosts. No such thing as ghosts. Okay. Now, last thing I want to talk about, I know we're going a little bit late, is I want to talk about the man who tried to exorcise all the spirits here. A man called Colin Grant. Now, he came here in 1999, the head of the Spiritual Society here in Edinburgh, and he brought with him a torch and a journalist from the Scotsman's newspaper, a candle, and he did his exorcism just over here. Now, he wanted to free all the spirits inside. Now, let me just get up a photo on screen of Colin. Why is my torch not working properly? Sorry, 1 second, guys. Where is he? Here he is. Let me just put him into this corner. Now, that is George. So, George, that is not George McKinnon. That is Colin. Now, Colin. When they took a photo of him, they noticed that in the background, right in this window, there was a face looking back at him. Now you can see it in that photo. That's the ghost photo. And up in the corner, you can see a zoom in. There was no one inside Greyfriars Kirk at the time, but there was something looking at him. Now, after 2 hours of doing the ritual, he said, "I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore," and he blew out the candle. Over the next couple of weeks, his health got worse and worse, and then he just died of a heart attack. And his wife, who was also part of the spiritual society, He said that he was cleaned by the ghosts here at Greyfriars Kirk. Let's look at the window, I guess. People have apparently, since this photo started going around, people have spotted faces in the window. Oh, okay, that's just a statue. That's a statue. We're good. We're good. We're good. Okay, now we've gone super late. I'm really sorry about that. So I am going to conclude it here. I don't want this to go for too long. So I'm going to turn this around the torch into my face, and I'm going to do my final, not my final goodbye. I don't want to say final goodbye. You know what I mean. I want to do my goodbye to everyone who's been so patient. Let me just swish this around. Okay, let me turn this down just so it's not too bright. There we are. So everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. If you really did like this tour, and I'm sorry about all the lag, and especially towards the end, me just sort of getting a little bit flustered with being in a graveyard. If you really did, please look out for my links. Follow me on Instagram. Follow me on my Facebook page. And if you really did like it, I would really appreciate if you can help me out by maybe leaving me a tip. There will also be there'll be my PayPal in the description, which you can check out. And I am going to go back and look through all the comments. I do know that things went a little haywire halfway through. So I promise you one thing, to all the people here on the stream, I will be back. I'll be back with a better connection and with even more stories. I do feel like I had to cut a few out just to sort of save time. And I did go a little over time because I'm really scared in this graveyard. But everyone, thank you so much for coming. I'm going to give it a few minutes. Just leave your comments, leave your thank you. And also, I can go, okay, also, what was I going to say? I'm going to read your comments later, and you know what, I'm just going to let it go for the moment. I'm just going to let it go for now, and hopefully I'll come back and see me again, and yes, I will walk through this graveyard again, for you. For all of you, because I feel I owe it to you. Thank you so much. I'll give you a second. Let me just flip it around. Okay, let me get this. Okay. Why did I put the light in my eyes? Okay. Why is it so cold in here? Okay. Let's give it another minute. If you have any comments, do leave it there. Okay. Why? Come on. How do I get out? Why is the automatic lights not... Okay. Why is the lights not... Okay. Okay. Come on, light. Why are you not switching on? Come on, auto lights. I'm at the gate. I'm good.